So I'd like to get us started this morning. My first job. Quiet. My name is Warren DeVries. I'm the Dean of the College of Engineering and IT at UMBC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our actually last Visionaries in Information Technology event for the 2009-2010 season. This is actually the 10th season that we've been doing this. I don't know how many of you were here at the beginning. I know I wasn't. This is yes, there are some. This is actually a really great event, and I'm really pleased to welcome everybody here. This is an event over the past 10 years that's attracted many world-class speakers and given us an opportunity in our area to really focus on the importance of IT to our business, government, and the industry community here, and also we hope the role that UMBC plays in moving this forward and helping everybody with their intellectual needs as well as competitiveness needs. So, you know, one thing that makes this work is people who attend, the other is the speakers. I'll talk about our speaker a little bit later on. But another important part is those who help sponsor us. So, one thing about the sponsorship of this event is those funds actually, any funds generated from this actually help support our IT-related departments at UMBC, very specifically our computer science and electrical engineering, as well as our information systems department and other important things. And it's all aimed at improving the quality of the opportunities that we provide for our students. So the sponsors I'd like to very specifically recognize are Constellation Energy Group, IBM, and Xerox. Those are our sponsors for this year's forums, and our promotional partners are also Blue Sky Factory and the Greater Baltimore Tech Council. So please let's recognize them. I actually also, as we're getting near the end of the academic year, this has actually been a good year for us. This year was the year that UMBC was recognized as the #1 up-and-coming national university by U.S. News and World Report. Our president, Freeman Hrabowski, was recognized by Time Magazine as one of the top university presidents in the nation. And also, we were really pleased to see UMBC recognized by the recently released Cyber Maryland report on having the second highest percentage of students who've actually graduated in science, and of course it's usually technology, but I want to put information technology as an important part, engineering and math fields in the state of Maryland. We're second, actually, only in terms of percentage of our graduates, only behind the Naval Academy. And as we look ahead, it's going to be a little more than a month from today. We're going to be having our graduate and undergraduate commencements. We're really pleased that in this challenging economy, our graduates are having wonderful opportunities at companies like Microsoft, GE Research, and Lockheed Martin, and we're really thankful that those opportunities are provided and that our students get a chance to compete. And actually, I did notice there's a few students back here that are probably still doing a little networking, and I hope they have a chance to meet and interact with you. So, you know, it's the faculty, the staff, and the students that ultimately are the heart and core of a university, and I'd like to actually have us thank and recognize them for their contributions to making this a good year for UMBC. So now it's time for the main event, and get the opportunity to introduce our speaker today. a senior executive from IBM, and over the years, IBM and UMBC have really developed a very strong partnership in a number of different ways, and this is the kind of industry-university partnerships that are actually important to UMBC, but it's important for higher education in general. And one of the things that makes this work is, you know, as organizations, we share a number of core values. A couple of those that are very important are both of our institutions' dedication to K through 12 education. It's important. It's important for the competitiveness of our nation, and it's something that we all have an important role and a vested interest in seeing happen. And the other is a strong commitment to improving the environment, and both through technology and how we use resources. And those are just a couple of examples of some of the core values that we share as organizations. So, you know, the collaboration over the years has ranged from actually a very strong commitment in support of activities in what was established as our multi-core computation center, which is a high-performance computational test laboratory facility we've got on campus here, really only enabled by IBM's support. Throughout the years, IBM's been a strong supporter of our computer science and information systems faculty through IBM Faculty Awards, and also internships opportunities for both undergraduate students, but also graduate students. So I know, for example, one of our information systems PhD students is actually at IBM Research in Tokyo, even as we speak. He started that this spring. We've also had, and this is important, they've been strong supporters of activities in recruitment on campus, participating in our career fairs and other on-campus information assessments. And of course, as I alluded to earlier, IBM's been a strong supporter of our Visionaries and IT Forum. So we're very grateful for that support, and actually today we're actually really pleased to have Dr. Bernard Myerson, an IBM Fellow and Vice President for Innovation and Global University Relations. Dr. Myerson joined IBM Research in 1980. In 1992, he was appointed an IBM Technical Fellow, which is the highest recognition of technical accomplishment that IBM applies or can provide. And in 2002, Dr. Myerson was elected a member of the National Academy of Engineering, which is actually the highest technical recognition the nation can provide. And so over the years for his innovation, he was cited as Innovation and Inventiveness Inventor of the Year by the New York State Legislature in '98, recognized as a United States Distinguished Inventor of the Year by the U.S. Intellectual Property Association and Patent and Trademark Office, and also recently, 2008, was identified as, recognized as Inventor of the Year by the New York State Intellectual Property Lawyers Association. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bernard Myerson. Thank you.
This is great. I was running along a little jar of grease through all my ears to get my head back out the door. Don't take it too seriously. It sets a ridiculous level of expectation for what's about to happen. Look, good morning. You know, I can't overstate IBM's bet that we place on folks like yourselves, what we place on education, what we place on the students that are here, because as you probably figured out, you know, if I started in 1980, I've been around this industry a very long time. I'm kind of hoping at some point we're going to have folks step up and take over the mantle of leadership here. My standard joke is that we can't become a society where you go out 20 years and all we're doing is selling each other insurance policies. We need to build things, we need to create and innovate things. Services is a critical part of our future, but services does not necessarily mean going forward and not actually producing for others. In fact, it can have a profound and positive effect on society, but it's one of many aspects. And as you well know, if you just eat one vegetable, you will starve to death, and if you just eat one, right, it's like anything else. There has to be balance in the ecosystem, and that's one of the things we're driving at. The concept that I'm going to discuss today is how IT interplays with that in creating a smarter society. But I did want to digress a very short period of time. Is there a team here from Xerox? It's a very small team. Okay. Nonetheless, you know Sophie Vandenbroek? I sure hope you do. Okay. This is somebody who I actually had to threaten to tie to a chair to get her not to come to work. The reason was she was so pregnant at the time, I was scared to death that while driving into work from 300 miles away, she'd give birth somewhere on Route 17. The point I'm making is that she, when she hired on, was a grad student, and she stuck around. She was absolutely brilliant and a very good friend of mine. It's the sort of thing where this is what we want to do. We recruit people from wherever we have to go to really do the extraordinary. And she did the extraordinary at IBM. She went on to become the Chief Technology Officer of Xerox Corporation. It's one of those things, again, that people who stay in the business and contribute deeply make a big difference, make a really big difference. And I just want to encourage, particularly the students, to stick with it. There's a glory people have nowadays to going into other professions in math and the sciences, hard sciences, that really suffer in terms of enrollments, getting people to stay with it. It's not easy stuff. But you do things that change the world, and that gets lost. And it changes the world for a very good reason, and I'll discuss that as I go forward here. Now, to begin with, the world has gotten very different in the last 5 or 10 years. Why is all this stuff, and when I mean stuff, I mean technology that underlies IT, getting very difficult? And there is a clue in a corollary question, which is, where have all the gigahertz gone? People used to literally line up at stores. Nowadays they line up, to get the iPad. They sleep on the sidewalk. Okay, it falls into the heading of need to get a life. However, sorry, those of you who worship Apple, it's okay to get it the next day. And I like that. Nonetheless, the fact of the matter is, you will notice nobody queues up on the floor anymore waiting to get the 1 gigahertz, or the 2 gigahertz, or the even funnier, the 8 gigahertz Intel Core, because there ain't any. That's kind of odd, because if you went back 5 years, you'd find they were supposed to be. Well, the world has changed, and it's forcing a dramatic change in IT and technology. Moore's Law, which was written by a fellow I consider one of the great geniuses of this industry, Gordon Moore, actually it was very simple. Put twice as much in a chip every 12 to 18 months and the economics work. Notice in that statement I never said a darn thing about how fast anything goes. The funny thing is, people behind Gordon, who clearly did not read his original papers or had no clue, talk about Moore's Law as being related to performance. It's not. It is about putting more on a chip. Now, it is true, of course, we put more on a chip to do more things, but it never said anything about faster. Now, Moore's Law does also bring with it a tremendous challenge, and Gordon is a good friend of another guy named Bob Denard. See, Bob figured out that Moore's Law's challenges, and maybe I'll back up a bit, Moore's Law's challenge is very simple. If you're putting twice as much on a chip every 12 months, let's say, you get 1,000,000 times as much on that chip after, let's say, 30, 40 years, which is what's gone by. Okay, so if it was a 10-watt chip, and you didn't do anything to improve matters in terms of the power each thing burned, if you have 1,000,000 times as many, and it used to be a 10-watt chip, it's now a 10-million-watt chip, which in a laptop will provide you with a brief but extraordinarily exciting experience when you turn it on. This is probably not a good thing. So, a friend of mine, Bob Denard, who invented something, okay, IBMers may not comment on this. Anybody know what Bob invented? He invented a few things you might actually care about. Take my word on this. See, this is sort of sad. He also won the National Medal of Technology for it. Anybody here ever hear of computer memory? Yeah, okay, Bob invented it. There's actually one guy who sat at a desk one day and said, yeah, the one transistor memory cell, otherwise known as DRAM, we like Bob. He's invented a few things like that, including the entire history of how you make semiconductors. You see, what he did was he wrote a recipe. It's kind of like boiling rice. And if you follow this recipe, each generation, when you put twice as much of the stuff on a chip, If you shrink things by this recipe, each thing burns half as much power. Very cool. Twice as many transistors burning half as much power means your next generation, the chip burns exactly as much power as it did the previous one. So instead of going 10, 20, 40, 80, right, 160, it's 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 in terms of the power burned by the chip. Bob's recipe is very cool, and this is called classical scaling. The problem is some elements in the chip, after you do this for 40 years, you get into the same problem as if you try to fold, a piece of paper 10 times. By the way, you can make a lot of money betting a gorilla that you can't fold a piece of paper in half 10 times. Usually macho overweights brains. And what will happen is about the 7th fold, you want to watch somebody turn beet red and then, run. In any case, the point is, some of the elements you had to cut in half by this recipe each generation, they got down to about 5 atoms thick. There is a problem with that. What do? 2.5 atoms? When you get into the nuclear fission stuff, let me know so I can get out of the way. You can't keep cutting things in half forever. We actually got to atomic dimensions, and by the way, atoms don't scale. Now, the wonderful thing about employing scientists is one of the cute things about IBM is we actually have people who recognize that you don't bisect an atom. This is not going to happen. Now, this might not seem like an epiphany. Take my word, it's turned out to have been, because we were pretty much the first guys to realize this could be a problem. Furthermore, if you can't cut these things in half anymore, because you start cutting these layers that are supposed to be insulators in half every generation, they reach the point they're not insulators anymore. In fact, they're fantastic conductors and the chip explodes. Little problem. So if you don't follow this recipe over time, you eventually set fire to the user of the computer. Again, bad thing. Cuts down your customer base and you get lots of lawsuits. So what do? Well, there's actually a history of stuff like this happening. This is supposed to be, at the very bottom of this line, is the amount of heat coming out of a packaged chip. And you'll notice it's damn near zero. It's a fraction of a watt per square centimeter for a very long time, about 20, 30 years. And in an older type of technology called bipolar, we kept making the transistors smaller and smaller and smaller until the power went berserk. The peak point on bipolar is 13 watts per square centimeter. Let me tell you that you iron your pants at 5 watts per square centimeter. Your steam iron is 5 watts per square centimeter. Okay, the chip in bipolar mainframes back in the day were 13 watts before we finally got that under control and said, this doesn't work. So we switched to a new technology called CMOS and paid more attention to the physics. And we pretty much knew going forward that if you continue to make the chips smaller and cut things in half, the same problem would occur there. You'd scale it too small, you'd violate some of the laws of physics, current would start leaking through the devices, and they would basically burn up. Oddly enough, people didn't notice this, even though we'd already done it once. My only explanation, because I showed this in front of 20,000 people for the first time at the event center down in Las Vegas, as you show these two parallel disasters, where the top chips there are essentially useless. The left one you cooled with a fire hose. The one on the right was a Pentium chip from Intel, where you would have had to drag the helicopter in to basically anchor it on the heatsink of your laptop to have this thing work. I mean, not sustainable. And I do wonder how you did the one on the right. My explanation is if you're a good engineer and you need your hand caught in a closing door and you break a couple of fingers, you pry the door open with your elbow, put the other hand in, and slam it to get additional data. There's no a priori reason people would have done this. Now, about 2006, the world invented multicore. Everybody announced we're going to make multicore computers. Why? Because instead of trying to make the chips run faster and do dumb, simple scaling, it didn't work anymore. You can get more performance out of a system. Now, notice the use of the word system. Not chip, not technology. It's a system issue now. IT changed. When I first predicted this in 2004, it was great. The next year, I actually had the pleasure of having somebody from another company that will remain nameless put my face up at a major conference, put a big red circle around it, a big red line through it, saying, Bernie says Moore's law ends. Good news is Gordon went and beat the hell out of him and said, no, when he said scaling ends, and it did. The funny thing is those same guys invented multicore in 2006 to solve a problem they said didn't exist. It felt really good to go back to 2001 when we began shipping that chip. We actually, in 2001, sneaked it out the door under the guise of something called Power 4. We didn't bother to tell anybody it was a multicore because we didn't really want to advertise the fact that the world was going to end in 4 years. We figured to let people figure that out for themselves. The beauty of it was we almost got away with it. The only guy who caught us is one engineer who happened to work for the Wall Street Journal of all things, actually did a cut down and said, this is weird, there's like 2 cores on a single chip, what's that about? The good news is nobody else caught on until about 5 years later. But the point is, the world has gone to hell in a handbasket in that field. This is hard stuff. When I started in this business, 300 companies were working at that leading edge of semiconductor technology in the United States. You could identify 300 companies with leading edge fabricators. Today, the companies erecting leading edge fabricators in the United States are down to 2 from 300. That's it, 2. In fact, what's really sad, it's us and Intel, and the sad part is even TI, which really, they invented the integrated circuit. Jack Kilby is the guy who holds the patent. There isn't one guy who has a patent on the integrated circuit. We worked at TI. They announced they were also getting out of this. This stuff is hard. We have gotten to the limits of physics, and when you innovate, it's so expensive, most companies don't believe they can maintain the return on investment. When I say innovation is important, what do I mean? What I mean is, you basically take the stuff on the bottom, which is basically outcome of innovation that IBM does in the fundamental sciences. And each time you do one of those innovations, you then apply it to the top, which becomes a technology. Science and technology go hand in hand. They are inseparable. They also make strange events. So I sat in a pub, no, not a bar, let's be nice. I sat in a pub near Bursley, England. And this is what it can be like working at IBM, which is a very interesting and sometimes humbling experience. I was sitting in the bar with 4 of my friends. The 5 of us are at a table like this, and we're about 3/4 of the way through dinner and about 5/4 of the way through the liquor supply of the pub. When it dawns on me that I don't belong at the table, and I announce to my friends that, look, guys, I don't belong here. I got to get out of here. I'm sorry, I just don't fit in. And they think I've lost my mind. So one of them finally says, what's the problem? I said, well, you do realize I'm the only guy sitting at the table who does not have a Nobel Prize. Yeah, 2 of the characters reminded me of in the bottom left corner, 2 of those characters sitting there. Then again, these guys invented scanning timing microscope. We also have the guys that invented high-temperature superconductivity. And it's a little daunting to discover you're sitting at the table having beers with these characters. But they produce things that enable nanotechnology and the understanding of surfaces and such that have gone through, incredible changes over the last, I would say, 20 years, and enabled many of the inventions we now take for granted in both materials and technology. Similarly, when you talk about materials, it's hilarious. When I joined IBM and we worked in silicon technology, the entirety of what we used to generate it is just colored in there. It's nothing. Hydrogen, boron, oxygen, aluminum for your metallization, silicon is your basic material, and phosphorus is your N-type dopant, boron is your P-type dopant. That's it, folks. That was the entire catalog of what we had to do to make technology work. Since the 1990s, we added a few other things: fluorine for etching, chlorine for selective growth, silicon germanium is something I did a lot of work on for accelerating bipolar performance, copper for metallurgy, tantalum, tungsten, titanium. These were all for interconnects. And that wasn't too out of control. Basically, it's wiring and semiconductors. However, since 2006, the world has gone insane. And the reason is we hit the end of scaling. Basically, for 40 years, it was really easy. You just make the transistor smaller, and it got faster, cheaper, better, the whole bit. Now you make it smaller, it catches fire, it costs more. This is not a good thing. It used to be that almost the entire of the improvement, generation to generation, is making it smaller and it works better. Now you make it smaller, it doesn't work at all. And you have to go fix that. And those fixes are expensive. You invent new materials like high-K, new interfaces. So you don't get to become just a physicist or just a chemist or just a lithographer. You have to be a little bit of each. Okay, now, semiconductor technology has undergone this incredible shift in terms of the struggle it takes to make it perform. But think about the demands of the modern world at the same time as adding to the use side of it. So here's the engine, which is having a tough time at the basic level, making progress at the rate it used to. Yet look what's happening to the demands on that engine. In 2005, you had about 1.5 billion RFID tags out there. In 2010, 33 billion. And all of them talk. Those of you who think, the internet is busy now with people and your kids texting, take my word, the things out there like RFID tags are a lot tougher on the system. The estimate is at the end of 2011, we'll have over 2 billion people active on the web. There will be something like 500 times that out on the web in terms of inanimate objects, cars, appliances, roadways. When you go onto Google Map, right, and they say, show me Google Earth, and you say, show me traffic. And by the way, those of you, I know you live around the Washington area, and you think the only color on Google Earth is red. No, there's green, there's yellow. So the sensors, okay, you guys, just look at Kentucky. The fact of the matter is there are other colors than red. They really are sensors. It's not just there for your amusement or to mark the roads. In any case, so you have all these smarts out there. They've been in the roads. Sensors been there a long time. Yet, welcome to Los Angeles. By the way, I've got to teach the guys who fake photographs and Photoshop things. You don't show a four-way pileup like this and then have cars on the right side departing the intersection smoothly because they obviously flew over the other vehicles. So I love this. I looked at this and said, you're kidding, right? Even I can do better than that. But nonetheless, you do get the point because the numbers are true. The estimate is, give or take, people drive about 38 times around the world, burning about 730 tons of carbon dioxide into the air, looking for a parking spot in LA. It's lovely. We probably could do better than that. A typical carrot travels about 1,600 miles to get to market, a potato 1,200 miles, and a chuck roast 600. I mean, come on, this probably the distribution network isn't working great. Gee, what a shocker that we throw away $48 billion of food every year because it just doesn't get there on time. We don't control the system well. Clearly, if we think the planet is smart, we really do need a smarter planet. Now, of course, IBM will fervently deny that's why we chose smarter, because smart clearly ain't working. But nonetheless, the fact is, what Smarter Planet is about is IT is out there with tremendous horsepower, and you can use it to address several issues that address society. The concept is solutions that impact society, whether it's roads or power, whether it's food, whether it's healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. These are areas that make profound differences, societal differences. And in the end, where we chose to start is at the bottom right, which is smarter cities, and there's a trivial reason. Why we began with smarter cities is pretty straightforward. More than half the people in the world live in a city by the end of 2008. All right, the population in the city will double in the next 40 years. 6.5 billion people will occupy cities, and cities, just the top 100 urban centers, throw off more than a quarter of the gross domestic product of the planet. Okay, so it has a huge impact environmentally, renewable resources. If we don't actually have solutions for this, cities could eventually go dark. There'll be about 1 billion cars on the road by 2015 alone, and what's really scary about the trend is the power consumption in the city and the power consumption around the IT associated with this. If you look at it and extrapolate to 2050, the only thing burning power will be the foot warmer under your desk, otherwise known as a server. So obviously it's not a sustainable trend. Obviously we need to do something profound to change that. And there is this amazing availability of technology. The question is, can we use it better? So what do you do in a smarter city? And I just picked a bunch of examples because obviously I'm not going to catalog everything. You wouldn't believe the list of what we've done already. The idea of smarter cities is go from an operational mode transactional. This is actually very familiar. I grew up about 1.25 miles straight ahead from there. No, I didn't grow up on a toll booth, by the way. That's the George Washington Bridge going into New York. I grew up about 500 feet north of the bridge on the New York side. And all we did at the bridge is collect tolls. That's it. I mean, it was transactional. And at the end of the day, you add it up, divided by how much per vehicle, and lo and behold, you could tell how many vehicles use the bridge. We're starting to gain insights. This is the electronic road pricing system in Singapore, where they actually monitor road traffic at many places very carefully. They can identify it by vehicle, they charge the vehicles, and so you're beginning to get some analytics that come in. But then when you integrate all those analytics, you can do some amazing stuff. What we've done in a couple of cities, and I'll show you the impacts, is we became predictive versus responsive. In other words, we are now proactive. We don't change, for instance, the flow of traffic to a road when the road is jammed. We understand chaos theory. The interesting thing about traffic is if you have a road where 100 cars can go by at 60 miles an hour at full speed, no problem, capacity is there. The funny thing is if you inject 5% additional cars, maybe it's 105, the road stops completely, bang. Chaos theory, what happens is this is either normal driving in New York and or the mathematics of describing highway flow, which is it's chaos. Once you get above a certain point, there's a breakdown in the flow of traffic where the person in front slows down 5 miles an hour, the person behind overreacts, slows down 7. By the time you're at the 10th person, they're driving backwards at 40. No, they just stop. Like I said, the dangers of endless extrapolation. But you understand, this is mathematically predictable. You can make predictions accurately as to the future. You can forecast, and that's a critical change in society. Now, this is the forecast set. On the left, it's just the actual traffic volumes versus what we saw, except the volume forecast is 10 minutes ahead of reality. The volume forecast is blue, the actuals are black. You will notice there is no difference. None. We are extraordinarily accurate at forecasting 10 minutes ahead what's going to happen in terms of flow and on the right in terms of speed. Tremendously accurate. The point is, these abilities to predict enable you to, in fact, influence. So we proactively look at this, and if we see that the traffic speed starts to head to zero, or there's a sudden downshift in traffic speed that we're predicting, we actually will then reach in and drop back the number of cars able to access the road and or very slightly raise the road price. Remember, you don't have to quadruple the road price. We're only trying to discourage 2 people from getting on the highway, or 3 people in the course of a minute. That's enough to actually preserve the traffic flow. And if you preserve the traffic flow, a lot more people get to work on time. This has been done in Singapore and elsewhere, where it's real time in the sense of the data coming in, but it's proactive in the sense of what we do about it. So we have real-time traffic data, but we don't respond to it. We use it to model what's going to happen in the future and address it before it does. This isn't about fixing or remediating a traffic jam. It's about preventing it from ever occurring. And that's a fundamentally different way to run the world. Now, the island of Malta actually tried to get out ahead in another area, smart grid, in terms of how they handle the distribution of electricity and water as key resources, because as you know, Malta is an island in a salt area. You know, water is a damn important resource, as is electricity. So you have to be very careful how you use it. And they're going to become the first country with an end-to-end smart grid. So they will use basically IT on a real-time basis to also do what I just described, which is monitor and proactively handle the flow of energy and water throughout the country. Now, what's happening is an electric meter, which used to be a dumb device, which just came by and took a reading from, has now become essentially a small PC sitting out in your home. This thing basically has all the necessary information that you need to tell both the client and the company what's happening, and both are important. If you walk away from your home and you leave the air conditioning on and it's going to be 100 degrees during the day and you're not home, you just blew off tens of dollars for no reason. It doesn't help anybody. Not to mention, you have to build extra capacity into the multi-generation system to deal with it, and that peak capacity drives up your own electric bill significantly. So what happens if you provide completely transparent control? And I just said a word that's key, transparent. This is actually an involving effort. This is something where you're not just creating something for business. The actual client becomes part of the ecosystem. This is a societal shift as well. So it has many impacts up and down the chain of use. Now, in the metering function, there are a lot of reasons this is very attractive, both to the user as well as to the company. You know what you're shipping power-wise, for instance, into an electric grid. You can add it up. You know, you're shipping X watts down the line. You can, however, compare the energy that's being invoiced to the energy being injected into the network. And when they're not even and you've got losses, they can be anything. They can be somebody who just goes out and clips 2 wires onto an overhead line, and assuming they survive the experience, they actually steal electricity, and sadly that happens. It could be measurement problems, so you've got a bum meter, and you don't want that because you either get $1 million electric bill or a bunch of zeros followed by one you can't pay in one shot anyway. All of this basically goes away because these meters are spilling out data at the rate of at least every 15 minutes, giving a complete history of what's gone on for that prior period of time. And by ingesting that into the system, they can really control it very tightly. The other thing is everybody loves the idea of generating their own electricity, right? It is very cool. We're going to put up a wind turbine in the back and really offend the neighbors because it's in front of the bed and switches constantly all night. Leaving aside the humor value, it has another problem, which is you do realize wind starts and wind stops. The electrical networks have spectacular resonances. And what's interesting is, the wind blows and the current going down the lines from a wind farm rises dramatically. The wind stops, the current drops. The trouble is the resonances can cause those increases and drops to become so large that they melt the wires, which again is a bad day. So it turns out in the US and a lot of other places where we have ancient infrastructure, and Lord knows ours is ancient because we very early got into the electric business, The infrastructure, actually, you run those lines many times at only 60% capacity or less. Why? Because the oscillations induced by these clever things where people have their own generation capacity or you put out a local solar farm, those oscillations actually will burn down the transmission system. Not a good thing. No problem. What you do is build another 50% capacity, except it's billions and billions of dollars to lay that out. Well, it turns out, among the other things this enables you to do is build in what they call transient control software, which is a series of inductors and other control systems that are run by the central computer. And what they do is they actually level those transients. You can't actually defeat them. If you stabilize the transients, which they've done in Japan, Hitachi has systems that does this in real time, they run the lines at about 95, 98% capacity as opposed to 60. Why? Because there are no transients. In the absence of transients, you can run the cables at 95% capacity, no problem. Well, the interesting thing is you realize they get 50% more capacity out of their lines than we do just by having some very smart software and a bunch of sensors. And save billions of dollars. These are not little impacts when you have this kind of capability. They're tremendous. On the water side, it's the same thing. Though I did point out the guys who decided to show an old Roman aqueduct crack was probably a little over the top of water distribution in Malta. They're a little beyond that. But nonetheless, you know, what you put in the water system, only about half of it arrives at the tap if you're in New York City. This is a huge problem again. So it's the same issue, which if you, somebody actually said, interestingly, water is an information technology problem, but the truth is, yeah, because neighboring communities don't coordinate their efforts. We actually have a supercomputer called Blue Thunder, where we can predict within a couple of, you know, within a mile whether it's going to rain in a given spot. So if we have a catchment in one area where there is going to be rain, we draw on that catchment to draw it down so when it rains it fills back up. But another catchment where there won't be rain, we don't draw on it. They managed in Burlington, Vermont plant to cut our water use by 30% by doing just that. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do in the real world that have a tremendous impact. The only little issue, is when you highly automate stuff and put it all out there on the grid, you do realize, of course, that there's a hacker born every minute. Not the sharpest tax in the box, but nonetheless, they're a stubborn bunch. And they will try to hack into your system just for glory or stupidity or whatever money they can make at it. And so you have to be extraordinarily careful when you're putting your nation's infrastructure up there. It was a rather alarming discovery that there was a lot of code that looked an awful lot like backdoors, that, you know, trapdoors that had been left into the code of the nation's power plants. I believe the number, don't quote me on this, I believe the number was over 50% of the power plants had code in there which would allow people to reach in and corrupt them. Okay, so this is a serious business, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, other than emphasize that it's not, you know, it's always a balance. You have to be aware that every time you have an advance, you have a liability that goes with it. Nonetheless, smarter cities have made a huge difference already. You can easily take 10 to 20% off of the cost of new physical infrastructure by being better at the use of what exists, which means you're very much less disruptive in terms of updating things, as I gave you the example with stabilizing the grid. Livability and sustainability are improved dramatically, but the last one is important, which is there's a sociological phenomenon, which is basically the equivalent of what goes on at a social site like Facebook, where there's a tremendous transparency in the operation of the city. And people are basically good. They are intrinsically good. And they will, if you give them the tools with which to understand how their behaviors are impacting the world around them, they will react well to that and help. So if you want to engage the public, the first thing you got to do is make this stuff visible and consumable. And so you can provide a dashboard about how the city is doing, and people react extremely well to this. So there are a lot of factors here. This isn't just about technology now. It's about the integration of technology and society. There is a challenge you get into, which is this causes a flood of data. Everything I've talked about just now generates absurd amounts of data, ridiculous quantities. If you have a road sensor and it's, you know, screaming every time a car runs over, and believe me, I'd yell if a car ran me over, this thing is screaming out data at the rate of literally thousands of bits a second of data in terms of speed and temperature, you name it. All of that flows to a central point which starts gurgling on the data. Yet most of the data is completely worthless. It's the same as the prior data. So you start to need a lot of intelligence in how you ingest data, because if you're the person making the ultimate decision, what do? You can't look at the million bits a second that come in. So stream computing is an interesting way of dealing with it. It's a different IT paradigm that's going to be more and more common in the future. where on the left side you have the ingestion of vast amounts of data from disparate sources. I don't care if you're looking at the temperature, the road flow, the question of what crops are doing in Alabama. All kinds of data flows in out of the world, most of which you just don't care about. What you have then is the need for a series of decision engines where the person at the right side has to make some critical decisions as to whether or not they do X, whatever X is. There need to be decision engines that filter the data and only supply what is relevant. That is a danger, that's a very slippery slope. Notice what I said, filter the data. Lord forbid they filter the wrong data, you're in trouble. So the key is, it has to also be a learning system where there's a feedback, where if you say, no, I really needed this data, or you ask for it, the machine says, all right, and it infers. Inference is a very tough thing, folks. Let me tell you, computers are really good at yes and no. Maybe does not compute. Yet they have to do maybe. They have to infer. This is an entirely new schema of how you do IT. But it is something that needs to emerge because you've got tens of billions of pieces of data coming in the left side. About 6 matter. And you've got to sort out which they are, get them to the person on the right in a meaningful time. Now, it's very impressive when you apply it to real-world infrastructure. These are tens of billions of pieces of data. This is a map of traffic seen by what we call stream processing in Stockholm. And it's just an incredible mess. I mean, if you just said, if you threw this up on the screen of a taxi driver's dashboard and said, get us from the lower left to the top right side of the city in the best possible time, yeah, good luck. This isn't something you do arbitrarily. But in fact, if you take this and you do the processing of what's coming into the city, who's in the city, where they are, where the destinations are, where the sources are for taxis, you can, in fact, and we've done it in concert with a university partner, provide flow optimizations for commercial enterprises, but you can also have a profoundly positive impact on the overall society. And I'll show you an interesting example. This is the day before on the left, and the day after on the right, where road charging went into effect, which was dynamic. In other words, road charging going into the city turned on and said when you get above certain thresholds, you raise the price to slow down the flow of traffic into the city and all. Now, it's not that all folks who lived in Stockholm got really cheap in the after side on the right who didn't go in. The funny thing is, if you look at the road on the left of all those cars and you look at the one on the right, it looks like everybody went home. They didn't. You got to remember, the traffic on the left is creeping along at 1, 2, 3 kilometers an hour. So if you look at one point in the road, one car every 5 seconds is going by. The one on the right, one car every 5.2 seconds is going by. It's the same number of cars. The difference is if they're going at 100 kilometers an hour or 60 miles an hour, basically they go by in a heck of a rush and you don't get the jam. This is what I was talking about. If you stay the right side of the threshold of the onset of chaos, you can get almost the same number of cars through the same area, but in an incredibly short amount of time. So it cuts dramatically down into the amount of carbon that goes out of the atmosphere, into the time it takes to commute, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, they do charge money for this. They get about $120 million a year revenue that they can pour back into the city. So the entire system paid back in about 4 years, which is very good for something that makes such a profound change. There are other things, though, that are much more, hit very close to home. They're life-changing. Stream computing, as I said, enables you to look at these thousands, millions of pieces of data and make important decisions. There's a class of infection that children in the neonatal ICU come down with called nosocomial infection. One of the hardest things to do is to predict when it's going to hit a kid. And babies don't sit up and say, I don't feel right. In point of fact, you monitor them, and they have very advanced monitoring techniques. You monitor thousands of data points a second coming off of all the sensors that are in the intensive care unit. And the trick is, if you wait to see when the temperature of a child's infant is spiking, it's too late. That child will, very unfortunately, the child may die. Because it's very late in the infection process. The trouble is there aren't a lot of flags that go up to warn you of this. What happens here, though, is what they're monitoring is, they're monitoring all of the basic attributes the child has, heart rate, blood oxygen, blood chemistry, the whole bit. And they're looking for second, third, fourth order correlations where if the heart rate may go up, let's say, 2%, but at the same time, the blood oxygen level drops 1%, and at the same time, the third parameter changes. If you monitor a bunch of those parameters, you can actually spot the onset of the infection earlier and earlier and earlier as you gain data. Right now, we get alarms up to 24 hours before the best trained and most experienced intensive care unit nurse can see the effects of that infection. So before the most highly trained individuals who've had years of doing this had any hope of spotting that infection and the onset of it, these systems already detected. So it's been an incredible success. You see, when people talk about smarter planet, they very rarely reduce it to things that actually, hit home in terms of being very crisp examples. This is, in fact, what it's about. It's about taking data and IT and all the flow of data off of sensors and turning it into something that is a very measurable outcome that actually has benefit for society, and it's also a very good business. In fact, the good news is, the best news is when these things go hand in hand. You do something that's inherently good, and it turns out that it's something very reproducible and actually remarkably inexpensive compared to adding staff who still couldn't do the job. You can throw many people as you want at this. There's no human being who can monitor 1,000 bits of data a second and come up with a sensible result before they start, blabbering. The vision that we have, and this is where I'll wrap up, the vision that we have for a smarter planet is that it already is heavily instrumented. No matter where you go, we're taking data. It's highly interconnected. We're drowning in the stuff. And it's intelligent. The trouble is right now that it's not proactive. And we are moving it from reactive to proactive as fast as we can. That's what Smarter Planet is about. It's not about fixing catastrophes, it's about avoiding them. That's a seminal shift. If you really think about it, it's a bit like being able to send an ambulance to the site of an accident before the accident occurs, and then the next stage, of course, is you prevent the accident altogether. I mean, we're really trying to unravel some of the things that we thought is inevitable. You have to take a very much holistic approach. As I said earlier, it's no longer just about we're going to make higher clock frequency processors. Those days are dead. Not going to happen. It's not that you won't continue to get progress in semiconductors, but what's happening is the day that you could just say that it's the chip or it's the software, it doesn't matter anymore. In point of fact, you have to basically use all of the disciplines in the university to have any impact of consequence here. We are now in an era where the more integrated you are, the more successful you'll be. IBM has always had this theory about diversity, which is at all levels. I mean, we're a company, if you look at our semiconductor business, where I played a fairly strong role in that for a very long time, one of the things I took huge pride in is the comment they always make when people came and visit our site up in Fishkill, New York, is we have the United Nations, except it works. You can go up there and let's see, you got Samsung, that's Korea, and then you got Sony and Toshiba, that's Japan, and then you got Charter Semiconductor, and that's Singapore, and then you got the guys out of AMD, they're out of Dresden, and then you got the guys up from the other side of AMD, they're out of Texas, that other country. The point is, they think so. The bottom line is, it is really a case where if you take a diversity of talents, you put them all in the same place, you'd be astonished what you can get done. The very last thing is that these are systems of systems you're trying to modify. Think about that. I mean, you've got a water supply system, you've got an electrical generation system, you've got a distribution network, you've got a fabric of society with an electrical company that actually is servicing the consumer, you've got distribution of IT, you've got cell phones. Each one of these things are systems that have huge complexity and they're highly heterogeneous. I mean, you've got an electrical system that fundamentally, you get a guy in big rubber gloves who goes over and throws a switch, and 99% of the world, that's your control of your distribution of electricity. Meanwhile, you've got a cellular system where you've got a bunch of people out there with some, souped up iPhone, and they're downloading Lord knows, they're sitting there watching Lord of the Rings trilogy on a cell phone, tying up a cell site to the tune of a couple of megabits of data a second. And there are thousands, and then tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands, and millions of these people. When you have something at that vast a scale, you're not going to do it yourself. I mean, this is going to be policymakers, it's going to be enterprises, and consumers are going to have to contribute. This isn't something that's going to be a solo operation. Those days also are gone. If you think about it, if consumers continue to insist that we're all going to watch Lord of the Rings on our cell phone sitting at the table because the speaker is roaming on, which I wouldn't blame you if you did, the hard realities are that you will basically bury the network. The current configurations of the network, all this stuff flows back to the middle. Well, guess what? If you're all burning a couple of million bits of data a second, and there are, 300 million of us in the US, so 300 million times 4 million, this is a big number. And probably whoever's distributing that data is going to have a really, really bad day. Those days are coming. So fixing problems that you see coming like that tidal wave of data, keeping in mind that that's nothing compared to what's coming out of the road centers and your grocer's freezer. this is going to be a huge challenge for society. I mean, IT will have some real big things coming at it it's got to deal with. So I'm going to stop there because I want to leave time for discussion and questions, but thank you for your attention. Yeah, I scared everyone to explore in the morning.
You touched on the, talking about our power grid and, the disrepair that it's in. Yet we want to put on top of it, a smart grid. It just doesn't seem to make sense. The other thing I want to bring up, an incident that happened close to home, Montgomery County, the computer that controls traffic lights went down. They made national headlines. And again, they found out that the kind of system was really down low. They didn't have a part. So I mean, does it make sense to, doesn't it make sense to fix the grid first?
Yeah, that's it. The question you're asking is great. It's like, where do we start? Because it's pretty interesting, right? There are older systems, there are pieces of the system that are literally failing now. It's like the electrical grid example I used, where you literally have you say, that system's going to go down, and you always have this vision of somebody that's modern control presses a button and magically saves the day. And in fact, two linemen are like running frantically out the door with big rubber poles to go, throw some remote switch 3 minutes later. And things crash, and if you start adding complexity above that, how do you help? It turns out that when you say adding smart grid on top of the electrical system, even if it's ancient, the good news is, and this is the trick, yes, you'd love to have the ability to spontaneously, through electronics, put in a phaser in a line and actually alter the phase slightly and damp down some oscillation that's going to burn down your lines. Except you can't. You actually literally have to send a guy out to run with a pole. So do you fix that first? And the answer is not really. You actually do still put in the complex IT system over the top to sense it. And the reason is, the good news is, in that system of power generation, there are other things that are relatively modern compared to the distribution network. For instance, some of the generation capacity that's now come up is based on gas turbines that can be brought up in seconds as opposed to literally hours through a traditional plant. So you may not be able to throw an inductor into a line quickly because that system's ancient, but you can attack the problem at another point, which may be to throttle back on your generation capacity over in that turbine plant, which will accomplish, at least to some extent, the advantage of tamping down an oscillation and reducing the possibility of damaging the network. The same problem is when you have an old system, and I actually heard a story like this last night. Somebody was telling me they have a PDP-11, which is an ancient deck machine from a company that really essentially doesn't exist anymore. And it's running a critical function, mercifully I will not say which critical function, in society, where in fact, when they decided to continue to use these things for some period of time, they actually had to create a small startup company that builds spare parts, power supplies for these systems, because they were the only part burning up, and the company didn't even exist to enable them to repair them. We have a problem. Society has allowed stuff to get back-leveled to such an extent that, yes, there is this nightmarish thing, which is where do you start? And what's happening is, for instance, when the traffic computer went down in Montgomery County, it wiped out basically the ability to go anywhere, because all the lights go green at the same time. No, actually, the good news is they all go red at the same time. Nobody has a death wish. But you want a system like you have in your car, where the automatic transmissions in your car actually have what they call a limp home mode. You ever wonder what would happen if your car gets hit by a lightning bolt, right, with all the electronics that run it? I know this. Actually, my wife's car got whacked by a lightning bolt. Very interesting. You start it up, and every warning light in the car is on and stays on. Doesn't shut off. However, it does run. Why? It's got a limp home mode. It's got a, oh my Lord, I'm not sure what happened, but it was really bad. And so there's this really simple little piece of bulletproof electronics that is, it's literally a guy with a hammer and chisel chiseling instructions. But somehow, the car runs enough to get it to the dealership, and you go, I don't know what happened. And then they look at it and tear out. Well, the good news is it's only 4 big electronic modules, and they put them on the floor, and they're still smoking. And they put new ones in, and the car works again. But you want that kind of a fail-safe system built into even the older systems. So sometimes you do put Band-Aids on the old stuff. It is a real challenge, though, I'll be blunt. We don't have a great answer. It's a great question. It's society. We basically draw priorities. You say, look, am I willing to put up with the fact all the lights are going to go red and it'll be inconvenient to commute home? Or do I first attack the power grid, which every time I get into the dead of winter and people flip on all the electric heaters in Virginia, the grid goes down. I probably want to make sure the houses stay warm and I'll live with getting home late. I mean, but it's a societal question, which is a good point. It's really not a technical one. We know how to fix all of it. It just takes an infinite amount of money, and we don't have that. So it's very tough. It's really something where everybody, that's why my last comment, it's going to be a mix of people, the consumer themselves, dictating the priorities, governmental agencies deciding what, in terms of life and limb, is required, and companies coming up with solutions that don't break the bank. This stuff can't be exotic. This is, it's KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid. I mean, it's hard to overemphasize how absolutely important it is not to get carried away with the complexity of solutions. If you do, they just won't work. It'll cost too much and take too long. So it's a huge and coupled problem, and I don't have a perfect answer for it, honestly. Yeah?
Would you care to comment on how we found ourselves as a nation of potential insurance salesmen and what you might think we could do to reverse that trend?
Where are the students here? There you go. I see a few hiding in the back going, please, God, don't point at me. Basically, we need to make our students rock stars. Okay, engineers need to be the rock stars of society. And by the way, folks, they have been in the past. Seriously, think back to the heyday of the Apollo program when we were going to the moon. Engineers are the rock stars. There's a great line from Apollo 13, failure is not an option. There was a time when engineers did things that were just unbelievable, and they still do. But the difference was society doesn't necessarily recognize that the same way it does in others. The engineer who figures out how to sequence the genome of a human for $30 as opposed to the current world record of, I think, 80,000, will change history, but will not be recognized as a rock star to the level of somebody who basically runs for 18 touchdowns in a season. And I would argue that both of them are tremendous achievements, and they should be recognized equally, financially and otherwise. It's a sad comment when, as a society, we don't see the value in somebody who does that. Now, I'm not saying that people are, starting in the streets as engineers horribly, but it does need to be something that is recognized as making a seminal difference in the future of society and the nation. I can tell you, because I spent the day with the new head of DARPA, Regina Dugan, and her associates, that this is recognized as a foundational problem, and they are trying everything they can to redirect DARPA so that that educational attribute, where you go out to become a high-end, engineer, scientist, mathematician, you name it, where that becomes, or once again becomes, a highlighted career and something that people, aspire to. That's being pushed very hard in that group now because it is recognized as a shortcoming. But you need the people. It's not about the manufacturing sides. It's not about whether GM is very competent or incompetent. That's not it. It is the people who actually do the work that ultimately will determine our success. So we need to raise a generation that actually, once again, values that and aspires to it. Most of us are here, myself as a representative of the Geezer Brigade, because I saw people do the impossible. I saw people go to the moon. It was to me, you think about what an achievement that was. These guys are using spit and baling wire compared to what we have here. They thought 8K of memory, you buy one to heaven. And they damn near did on a couple of occasions, but yet they pulled it off. I mean, they were doing things with technology that was so crude we would find it almost hard to imagine. And yet they made it happen because they were great engineers. The Apollo 13 story, if anybody hasn't seen it, go see it. You want to see what a great engineer is? That's a good engineer. So it's a very simple answer. It's a very hard thing to do. It's really, again, it's a societal issue. You can't have people who say, I'm going to make a bunch of money and retire at the age of 40 with a vineyard in California. Or if they do that, you know what? They should have done it as an engineer. You want to have a lasting impact in society, not in just yourself. It's not asking a lot, but it's something that will take a seminal shift in what we value. And yet, if anybody in this place can do it, it's you guys who sit in the room. It's your job and my job. I spent a day with a bunch of kids, about 12-year-olds, on engineering day, teaching them how to build bridges. And rewarding those who built the best bridge. And you had a budget, you had a time frame you had to do it in. It was incredible. And the kids were very excited. That's engineering. They had no idea what an engineer even does for a living, what a scientist does for a living. I'm a hardcore physicist, you know. What do I do inventing Xbox, you know? Ruin society, no. Clearly. But it is something that we need to work on and as really a focal point, not an afterthought. I think we took it for granted that it would take care of itself, and it hasn't. So we need to do something about it. It may mean changing our policies. You know, one of the standard things that I'm sure I'm going to get hung for is, you know, we're a country of immigrants. And the fact is, if somebody wants to come here and study math and the sciences, and they want to study and become an engineer, physicist, chemist, I don't care what, fine. You take a green card, you staple it to their PhD, and you welcome them. Why? You know, I don't know about you, but you don't look Native American, right? My family came out of Russia. It's one of those things. We somehow lost sight of the fact that we need people like this. These are the visionaries who will change society for the better. It's a great question, though. It's a hard answer. Yeah.
I noticed a lot of your smart city examples were outside of this country. I'm wondering if presentations like this are being made to our city and state officials or policymakers, because like you said, it's bigger than any one entity.
Yeah, actually, I intentionally chose, that's a great question. The question was, most of the examples I showed were actually outside of the U.S., of course. The reason I did that is because the inside of the U.S. are easy. Dubuque, Iowa, actually is exactly like the country of Malta. In fact, we've set up a dashboard. It's like the dashboard of your car. A citizen can log on and actually look at a dashboard, how the city's doing in water and electricity and the whole bit. I mean, we've done that there too. It's very important that people understand this is a global issue. And that's a good point. It is not just here. It's not, you know, it's really a global issue that makes this all work. We can't address it just locally, and yes, we do present it as such. I think I'm getting the hook, or we're out of time.
Well, we can maybe have one more question.
Yeah.
You spoke about the impact of power on performance for computer chips.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about how in 2006 we went through a technology called multicore, but you didn't talk about the collateral impact of doing it. For example, now you have to go to a whole new software paradigm to actually take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
We're not prepared to do that. So you talk about one solution, but you ignore the consequences of what that solution was.
Well, I would prefer to state it slightly differently, which is I recognize that in a 35-minute talk, you're not going to be able to scroll through all of them, because every one of those has about a 6-hour discussion behind it. So I'm not picking on the software guys. The fact of the matter is there isn't a single topic I talked about there that isn't literally a full-day lecture in and of itself. Yes, when we go to multicore, we are not prepared to do all the software behind it, of course. But you know what I can say about virtually everything we have there has about 14 caveats that go to the next stage. And so you're absolutely correct, but this is just the constraint of giving a 35-minute talk about a 5-day subject. The fact of the matter is the point you're making is absolutely true, which is we have software that handles the use of multi-core systems, but it handles it so poorly at such a low level that the benefit of just putting more cores on the chip, of course, goes to zero at some point as you put just too many. And we haven't got good code that just does it seamlessly anyway. So there's a ton of work to be done, but you see the advantage of my giving this talk is now you get to go off and do that work. So you see this is a nice virtuous cycle, right? I leave you with the problems and run out the door. It's a perfect arrangement. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much. You didn't leave yet? No, as part of our tradition here, you must leave with, whoops, I gotta get the right end up. This is a little token that we hope you'll remember here. Absolutely. And get a chance to wear. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Very much. Actually, you know, when Bernie was talking about he switched from PDP-8 to PDP-11, I am of the generation that remembers the PDP-8 and thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And that's probably in the Smithsonian now. I do want...
That's when they just dropped to the bottom of the sea, actually. They didn't put that in the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
That was one of those that...
anyhow, this is actually a very inspiring presentation today. I think actually it tells us about the role that people in engineering and information technology have to play to actually help our society move forward. And actually it's a very important role that we have to talk about on a regular basis and actually act on, not just talk. I do want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I truly do hope you'll join us again as we start our second decade in the Visionaries in Information Technology series next year. So thank you very much for your participation.